Good evening and welcome to the show. This is the First Amendment, historically speaking, and I will be your host this evening. My name is Frederick Douglass Dixon, and as always, I would like to thank UPTV and the entire staff for allowing us to come before you and forward what we feel is esoteric information that will hopefully start conversations in homes, that will raise the masses to a higher level of consciousness. And that's the masses of us. And for those of us who are watching right now who are black, those African Americans, this information is for you to be able to combat some of the historical misnomers that you have absorbed and they seem as if they're true. So this is a counter narrative to what we call the dominant narrative that you hear on the regular basis. So we thank UPTV, and I really appreciate my assistant and brother Yusuf, so I thank him so much. And today we want to begin to talk about a subject that is normally once a year, thought about once a year, and has recently had its anniversary or that one day of the year, and now we continue to move along. But I wanted to stop today to give some overview and some clarity to the great life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Yes, we've had the holiday that came and fell on the 19th, but his birthday was January 15th, 1929. We want to make sure that we begin to look at Dr. King not simply as a dreamer, but and put it in its proper perspective, as a revolutionary, and why folks would only have you believe that Dr. King was lost in some sort of dream. Well, today we'll do our best to forward some information that will have you thinking just a little differently about this great man and what it was that made him so great. When we talk about a great man, and we're talking about one of our greatest, then we have to look to how he got to where he was and who played a key role in that. And look no further when we talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. than his father, the great Reverend himself, Martin Luther King. Well, let's make sure that we know that we can, during this small time that we have, refer to him affectionately as Daddy King. Daddy King himself was a very learned man, self-taught, very strict in Southern tradition and Southern etiquette, but also one who understood what Southern etiquette had done to him and what he did not allow Southern etiquette to do to his family. So therefore, this visionary, Daddy King, this paradigm, these thought patterns that he had, you see emulate, you see them absorbed, and you see them gush from the being of his son, Martin Luther King Jr. So if it is proper, then let us start at the beginning. Dr. King himself and Dr. Martin Luther King and his father, Daddy King, that was not their original names. Now we're going to get into some esoteric information that'll have you thinking just a little differently. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Martin Luther King Sr., their original name was Michael Lewis King and Michael Lewis King Jr. But in 1934, Daddy King travels to Europe and begins to absorb even deeper the readings and the techniques and strategies of Martin Luther as he travels to Germany. Now, Martin Luther broke away from the Catholic Church in this huge fight, and he tacks theses on the wall, and he charges the Catholic Church with almost everything, 99 theses. And he tacks them on the wall, and he literally charges them with being plunderers of the community, with them being thieves and murderers and robbers. So he breaks away in what now we have as the Lutheran Church. So if we look back to what Daddy King's thoughts were, Daddy King's thoughts were to tie him as well, and more importantly, his son, to a name that symbolically would allow him to tie into what we call the great reformer, Martin Luther. So again, Daddy King is at the helm, and he is steering his son in the direction of greatness. Now, Martin Luther King, as far as it goes, you'll find him and you'll find people talking about his brilliance. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was done with high school by the age of 15. Now, lots of folks say he graduated. This is not true. You won't find a degree on file. Here we go again with the esoteric information from Booker T. Washington High School, from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The influence of Daddy King and his father had plenty of influence. His father was very close to a person who was very influential in Morehouse admissions department. And the story goes that when his dad was pushing him and his friend was ready to do him a favor, his friend said, well, if he can do the work, send him. Dr. King goes into Morehouse College at 15 years old. He's done by 19. Moving on, Dr. King receives his BA in sociology from Morehouse and moves along to Crozier Theological Seminary and Boston University. And before it's all done, his educational career, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has his PhD by the age of 24. Not many of us can say that. Now, what we can say about Dr. Martin Luther King is his brilliance continues to shine as the veneers of hypocrisy are removed by us studying year in and year out and finding more and more and more about Dr. King. And what we find is Dr. King was a revolutionary for some time. And if that is true, then he gets this revolutionary spirit directly from his father. Now, it is good that we go with overviews about Dr. King, but let's take a few of his choice words to allow to set the pace for us to understand with clarity and depth this great visionary. He says, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Now we know Dr. King sacrificed his life, but we also know that Dr. King was very influential on generations of revolutionaries. Whether we understand, and for the longest time, I did not understand why Dr. King chose to use the tactics and the strategies of Mahatma Gandhi and nonviolent protests to reach his desired outcome. But I do understand that if he had used a different route that tied into violence, then the movement perhaps wouldn't have been successful. So when we question Dr. King's tactics, and we should, critically, we should always question his tactics. We should question him as a man, but we should understand his greatness and be able to take the best out of it and leave the rest out of it. And he goes on to say, he said, the time is always right to do the right thing. So Dr. King, December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, Montgomery, she refuses to give her seat up on the bus. And eventually, this goes into the over 1 year Montgomery bus boycott, and Dr. King becomes a national figure. Because of his ability to speak, because of his youth, because of his connection to what the movement needed to look like, he was chosen. So when we say people are chosen for certain things, that means there's a higher being that's tied into it. Indeed, what Dr. King called our cosmic companion, he called God. And when he talked about his cosmic companion, he talked about being unafraid because of his cosmic companion. Now, as we look back over Dr. King's life and works, he was consistently in the middle of threats. He was consistently in positions where his life was at jeopardy. And I cannot say, because I don't know fully, but I don't remember seeing pictures of security guards around Dr. King. But what you do see is Dr. Ralph Abernathy, his right-hand man. Lots of times you'll see Andrew Young. And then you'll see a host of other folks who were a part of his inner circle. But what you don't see is the same security that one would have in that position. So somewhere along the line, although he was fearful for his life, he was unafraid. He was an unafraid soul. So he says the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Now, we all have heard things about Dr. King, and we've heard his voice, and it resonates from generation to generation. But all we hear, for the most part, is "I have a dream." Now, Dr. King himself questioned that very dream directly after the March on Washington. And in a meeting in 1966 on the south side of Chicago, more specifically in the Hyde Park area, and even more specifically on the block of 49th and Woodlawn, Dr. Martin Luther King meets with the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he reveals to him that he's afraid that he's integrating his people into a house that's burning. So Dr. King's vision, as much as we don't know about it, was indeed a revolutionary stance. So Dr. King understood that eventually, because I've heard this directly from his lips, that there would be a black president in about 40 years. And he said that in 1966. So he was tied to vision. He was tied to his cosmic companion. He was unafraid. He was as charismatic as times would allow for a charismatic figure to be. And he was indeed attuned to what the future would hold. So he was tied into prophecy. All these go back to his connection to his father. So why do we limit Dr. King to just having a dream? When in that same speech, Dr. King charged the United States government about morality and its morality or lack thereof. And he said America, when he talks about the bank of morality, he said he refuses to believe that America has insufficient funds. So there again, he felt like America could be a great place if the black man, woman, and child were treated with equality, full equality, not the equality from desegregation or integration, but humanity. So Dr. King goes from civil rights in the 50s to closer to his death and human rights. So Dr. King says, too, when he talks about education, he says the function of education is to teach one to think intensely and to think critically. Intelligence plus character. That is the true goal of education. I would agree with Dr. King that that is the true goal of education. Now, we have to realize that those things and those characteristics that he mentioned are rarely found in formal education. So he had an eye to what would improve the situation of the black man, woman, and child. And Dr. King would probably be one of the most misunderstood figures in American history. So he wasn't the first to think of nonviolent means as a way to find equality in America for blacks. In fact, that particular honor goes to James Farmer, who found CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. So Dr. King himself never said that these were things that he drew himself, but he understood what worked in the South. And if you ask Dr. King, he said there's no place as prejudice. Now, he had been all over the country. He said there's no place as prejudice as Chicago. In 1966, he goes to Marquette Park, which at that time was fully segregated and also a stronghold for the Chicago urban Ku Klux Klan. And he's hit in the head with a rock during the march. And Dr. King says there's no place in the world as segregated, there's no place in the world as violent as Chicago. I would agree with Dr. King, and I can't imagine what 1966 in Chicago looks like. But it's today as segregated and violent as it was then, if not more so. So, Dr. King's trajectory as a leader is always highlighted in 1963 with the March on Washington, when he brings 250,000 people to Washington, D.C. And he gives this eloquent speech. Now, we have to realize that when we remove the humanity from our heroes, then we do ourselves a complete injustice. Dr. King was indeed a man who had the lust that a natural man has. So we will hear a lot of things about Dr. King being unfaithful to our dear sister, Coretta Scott King. And then I say, what man who is a real man hasn't at some time in his life had that kind of decision to make about fidelity and infidelity, let alone being as powerful and as popular as Dr. King was? Now, I'm not taking up for anything that Dr. King had done that was misconstrued or put together or constructed as being less than holy. Well, you're holding people too high to say that one should be holy because one is a preacher. Well, just imagine if you had that kind of power and the challenges that one would have that goes along with it. This makes him human. So again, Dr. King himself, from 1963, begins to change from having a dream to becoming far more radical, far more in your face, far more non-compliant with the powers of Washington. And he becomes one that looks now to become a world leader, which in turn put the United States government and those clandestine agencies of intelligence in a really bad situation. They had the CIA, the FBI, and all kinds of esoteric agencies had bugged Dr. King's rooms, his homes. Well, let's put it like this. Two of Dr. King's closest allies were both paid FBI informers. Solomon Jones, who was Dr. King's chauffeur, and Ernest Withers, who was the lens, the camera. He caught the images, some of the most intimate images of Dr. King, both paid off by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI on the payroll. And those are not all the people around him who were not his friends and who eventually became loyal contributors to his demise. We have to look at Jesse Jackson. Now, I hate to waste time on messy Jesse Jackson, but the truth of the matter is Reverend Jackson played a large role in his demise. And if we want to go to a point where Dr. King becomes hated, we have to go to 1 year before the death of his life. So we're saying April 4th, 1967, and he gives a speech and he comes out and he denounces the abominable war in Vietnam. This indeed was the beginning of the ending of Dr. King. Again, April 4th, 1967, Riverside Church, New York City. He comes out and he swings hard. Now, at the time, he's passed the Civil Rights Act. He's passed the Voting Rights Act. So, indeed, he is in the pocket in some regards to Lyndon B. Johnson. So, Dr. King takes a stand. And he tells from the very beginning about how he opposes the war in Vietnam. And for those of you all who are looking for Dr. King's word to speak for himself, please read the speech, Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam. There's another one, Why We Can't Wait. Dr. King is no longer having a dream. He's waking up. He did not die because he had a dream. He was executed, murdered, and assassinated because he woke up from that dream and saw his enemy for what it really was. So some of the leaders, Whitney Young, Asa Philip Randolph, begin to turn their back on Dr. King after this speech. The New York Times rides his back. So now he becomes much more than a local or national figure. He becomes international, and now he's at war with those who control the media. Now, for years, Dr. King has had lots of support from the Jewish community. Livingston was a very close friend of his, who was also a friend of Ella Baker's. So Dr. King was financed in some regards by the Jewish community, those who were liberal. And he was able to make inroads with that group. So as Dr. King becomes far and far more at the periphery of what Lyndon B. Johnson is asking for the civil rights movement and those who are the figures of the movement, he begins in that last year of his life to be pushed out completely from that particular crowd. He's pushed out completely. So Dr. King is now an isolated man. He's being beat up on by almost every group. And he's working on this Poor People's Campaign, where he's going to take a certain amount of people to Washington, D.C. to literally have a poor people's camp, and they won't leave until there is a change in some of the ways that the United States government is dealing with poverty. There's a war on poverty, and Dr. King is going to lead here in America. So how do we look at Dr. King in the last year of his life? Isolated, looked to as more than just a troublemaker, looked to as one who has had a career that adds up to not a lot of successes. And now, in that last year, being set up by close friends for his ultimate assassination. These are true characteristics of a hero if you can stand and withstand this kind of pressure for years and years of your life. Well, it's a well-known fact that Dr. King would sometimes drink and smoke. He would have a drink, he would smoke a cigarette. And on the autopsy table, the physician made a comment that at Dr. King dying at 39 years old, he said he had the heart of a 70-year-old man. So the pressure that was upon Dr. King to realistically transform America, as wicked as it was, as wicked as it is, wicked as it will be in the future, to have that fall on one man's shoulder, that's a lot of pressure. So when we talk about Dr. King saying that he was unafraid and he had been to the mountaintop, that was far more than just Southern rhetoric from the pulpit. That was a connection to prophecy. A couple things about Dr. King. One thing we want to read about him, and he says it himself. His words are far more than sufficient. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I agree with Dr. King. And I have a newfound respect every day when I think about Dr. King. Even in the last days of his life, Dr. King was saying radical things like, don't spend your money where you can't use the washroom. He was after Coca-Cola and Wonder Bread for them to not have black prophets if they were not going to hire blacks. So Dr. King himself understood the power and the buying power that blacks had. And he told them to pool and collectively use your money to cause change. A couple of things that we like to talk about with Dr. King are some really hidden facts about Dr. King. During his time in college in Boston, Dr. King fell in love with a white woman whose name was Betty. She was a cafeteria worker at the university, at Boston University. Really, you don't talk about those kind of things. Also, Dr. King, as a young man in the South, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, picked tobacco. So his father had an understanding that, yeah, they were black bourgeoisies, but he understood that this young man needed to develop a sense of work ethic, which he did. Lots of people understand this, that Dr. King applied for a gun permit right around the same time during the Montgomery bus boycott. So as much as he advocated nonviolence, there was a part of Dr. King that understood wholeheartedly that he had to protect his own self and his family. And one thing that people never talk about, Dr. King as a young man attempted suicide at the death of his grandmother. So when we look at all of these things that we don't pay attention to, and we look at the last years of his life, which we don't like to look to because now we begin to expose those around Dr. King who are part of this plan. Even the same day that Dr. King is assassinated, Andrew Young is gone all day. Can't find him because he's going to receive or he's going to retrieve an injunction for a march. He's not around. Even at 6 o'clock, when he's supposed to go to dinner, on his way to dinner, with Reverend Billy Kyles from Memphis and Ralph Abernathy. And if you want to hear Lyle's own words, just Google Lyle, just Google Kyles, Reverend Kyles admits. 3 words, Reverend Kyles admits. If you Google Reverend Kyles admits on your YouTube or in YouTube, Reverend Kyles admits, you will hear him in 1988 at a 20-year anniversary of his death, and we'll let you listen to that yourself. But he admits, in some regards, his role. So he says it. He says the last hour of Dr. King's life, he was in Lorraine Motel Room 306, he and Ralph Abernathy. Where was Andrew Young? And what happened was, he literally says it, that Dr. King comes out on the balcony and supposedly Dr. King is smoking a cigarette. Ralph Abernathy mysteriously goes back and gets Dr. King's coat. Reverend Kyles admits that he literally steps away from Dr. King and bang, there's the shot. So I say to all of you all who wise enough to understand and ingest this particular thought, it takes thousands of conspirators for one crucifixion. There's no way in the world that one lone gunman, some misfit, some social misfit, James Earl Ray, to be able to assassinate Dr. King. The Memphis police played a role. The FBI played a huge role. Those in his inner circle who are still living, please look to them, because if they were of knowledge about Dr. King's death and were not on the payroll per se, then their lives would be in jeopardy. So I say, we should look at Dr. King a little differently. And this information is hopefully going to point you to the light of understanding under the searchlight of truth and cause you to think about Dr. King slightly differently. And we want you to understand that, yes, he was a warrior. Although he had a dream, he woke up. So I say to you, and I leave you with Dr. King's words. He said, every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. To Dr. King, we appreciate the thought of Dr. King. We appreciate his life. We appreciate his family. And we definitely appreciate his hard work and sacrifice. So there's a book that I would have for those of you all who are interested. It's called Death of a King by Tavis Smiley. It covers the last year of Dr. King's life, and it's a very candid portrait and an accurate depiction of some of the things that happened to Dr. King. The last year of his life was not a peaceful year. I don't think since 1955 through 68 there was anything peaceful about Dr. King's life as he led the charge of nonviolent resistance. But I hope that this information, please, will allow us to continue. Ladies and gentlemen, this information may in no means change your mind, but because truth and you are so very important to me, I just thought you ought to know. I remain, with esteem and respect, a distinguished man of color, Frederick Douglass Dixon. Thank you.